Welcome to Things You Don't Know. Today we're looking at the lives of two great leaders of the movement for greater inclusion. One of these leaders was a pioneer of the physical therapy movement, and the other was an important politician who broke down many barriers, physical and cultural. Today, we delve into the life of Dr. Andrew Kramer, a name many may not know, but whose contributions to physical therapy transformed how we approach rehabilitation and healing. Born on November 23rd, 1912, Andrew Kramer's early life set the stage for his determination and resilience, a quality that would later define his work in the field.
Andrew was one of four children growing up in Perth Amboy, New Jersey, in a time of significant societal change and great personal hardship. His family was poor but close-knit, but tragedy would soon strike. In 1919, during the worldwide devastating flu pandemic, his younger sibling James lost his life. The death of his brother marked the first of many challenges Andrew would face. He was only 7 at the time, and the loss had a profound impact on him, planting the seeds of empathy and a desire to help others, particularly in their weakest moments. When Andrew was just 9 years old, his father, David, passed away in a life-ending accident. David died after falling off a roof while making repairs. Andrew wondered, even as a young boy, if something could have been done to save his father, and this was the beginning of his fascination of the idea that the human body could heal through touch, motion, and the right techniques. One of the most heartbreaking events in young Andrew's life involved his older sister, Helen, who had athetoid cerebral palsy and was mute from birth. In a time when the disabled were often marginalized and misunderstood, some believed cerebral palsy was a mental illness. Helen was sent to the Vineland Training School, an institution for those deemed unfit for society. Her placement there was not just an act of ableism, but a tragic reflection of how society treated the vulnerable, especially individuals like Helen. For more on this subject, please check out our earlier episode on ableism and the history of such institutions. Helen's time at Vineland was anything but peaceful. Andrew, at just 16 years of age, tried desperately to get his sister released or at least get her the proper care. But these efforts were met with hostility. Authorities threatened Andrew with a permanent commitment himself if he continued to challenge the system. In a cruel twist of fate, Helen was murdered by another patient at the institution. Losing Helen in this way shattered Andrew's heart. It was a grief he would carry with him for the rest of his life. In later years, he often expressed a desire to be reunited with his beloved sister.
In the wake of Helen's death, Andrew focused on learning. He believed that her fate might have been different if she had received proper care, and so began his journey into physical rehabilitation. No formal training was available in the field at that time. But that didn't stop Andrew. He immersed himself in the rudimentary knowledge available, piecing together what he could from books, observations, and experiences. With only a few dollars left to his name, Andrew had made a bold decision. He spent his last bit of money to attend a lecture by the famous cereal tycoon and health guru, John Harvey Kellogg. You know, the breakfast cereal guy. Kellogg was an early advocate of holistic therapies and was renowned for his innovations, not just in the breakfast aisle, but in medical treatment. Kellogg, a larger than life figure, pioneered early forms of massage, hydrotherapy, and rational exercise. Many of these rooted in the stretches developed by Swedish physiologist Henry Peter Ling. Kellogg also experimented with electrical stimulation and even invented methods using bell jars for therapy. This was kind of an early form of what we know today as TENS units. These methods would lay the groundwork for some of Andrew's future work, giving him insight into how the body responds to various types of therapeutic touch and movement.
For Andrew, this lecture was transformative. Though he was at the edge of financial ruin, he took what he learned from Kellogg and it inspired him to push forward, take those early concepts and refine them into something more precise and more effective. And so his unofficial education began, an education that would later change countless lives. He had a habit of attracting mentors. We'll see this over and over again. For example, Helen Mahoney, chief physical therapist of Franklin Roosevelt's Warm Springs Clinic in Georgia, was interested in promoting physical therapy as both a form of emotional treatment as well as physical rehabilitation. Helen was a bold woman who would repeatedly challenge neurologists to public drinking contests and speakeasies at the height of Prohibition, took on the world and laughed. She took a shine to Andrew, introducing him to his other mentor, Franklin Lawrence. Lawrence was a nutritionist who, in the days before psychotropic medication, was working in Bellevue in what was then called the psychopathic ward. Under the guidance of these two mentors, Andrew began his formal practice at 18 years old in 1930 and kept going until his death 70 years later. Now, Lawrence's groundbreaking work combined a nutritional regimen, but it also connected physical touch with emotional well-being, a concept well ahead of its time. Andrew was intrigued by Lawrence's methods and saw in them a new dimension to the healing process. This exposure to massage, therapy, and his earlier knowledge of rational exercise, hydrotherapy, and Kellogg's other techniques expanded his understanding of what rehabilitation was. The field of physical therapy, as we said, was totally disorganized and was still in its infancy. Much of what he did was based on a mixture of intuition, personal experience, and the knowledge he had painstakingly acquired. But his approach worked. Patients regained physical function under his care and also found their emotional strength. He continued developing these techniques and became one of the most influential figures in physical therapy over the next 7 decades. Andrew's dedication and the mentorship of figures like Helen Mahoney and Franklin Lawrence allowed him to push the boundaries of what physical therapy could accomplish. In his hands, what had once been a rudimentary science became a powerful tool decades before the term was known for holistic healing. Unlike others in the medical and rehabilitation field, Andrew Kramer rejected the concept of professional distance. To him, his clients just weren't patients, they were family. His treatment rooms, and I can tell you this from personal experience, friends, were filled with laughter and music and joy, creating a healing environment on multiple levels. Clients often remarked that coming to his clinic in some ways felt like coming home.
For Andrew, therapy wasn't just about physical recovery. He believed in creating a space where people could reconnect with the simple joys of life, no matter their condition. His methods broke down the barriers between the therapist and the client. This familial, emotionally supportive environment fostered quicker physical and mental healing. Andrew's methodology was as much about the spirit as it was about the body. Music played a central role, with patients encouraged to find a rhythm in their movements. Laughter and joy were equally essential. filling the clinic with an infectious energy that uplifted everyone. He treated everyone from New Jersey Attorney General Arthur Sills, a personal friend, to Depression era families dressed in flour sacks, literally. The one thing that threatened to block his success was the misunderstanding that physical therapy was either chiropractic treatment or faith healing. He was prosecuted in 1935 for practicing medicine without a license. Now, the case was dismissed. Yet Andrew spent a few days in jail as he had no money for bail, as he was placed in jail pending the trial. Ridiculous. He loved telling the story of how the men who called for his head later begged him for help. In 1937, he married his beloved wife, Ethel, and their partnership would last nearly 63 years.
It was a true partnership along the lines of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. This combination of compassion, determination, and knowledge was the essence of Andrew Kramer, a man undeterred by obstacles, driven by compassion, and committed to proving that physical therapy was a legitimate and essential form of healing. His perseverance and the undeniable results he achieved helped solidify physical therapy as a respected profession in its own right. A devout Catholic, Andrew Kramer was known for his ability to connect with people from all backgrounds and all walks of life. This is a hilarious but wonderful story. In the mid-1960s, word of his unique therapeutic techniques reached the highest levels of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Mormon prophet David O. McKay, then in his early 90s, was suffering from the aches and pains of old age. When no one in Utah could be found to come up with a program, he personally requested Dr. Kramer's help. And this period was a very busy period in his life. He was serving as state president from the New York Physical Therapy Society, which was the national headquarters for the rehab movement at that time. To brush up on credentials, he took the time before seeing President McKay to sit for exams to earn a doctorate in physical therapy when they became available from UCLA in 1965.
Kramer was flown to Utah on a church-owned plane, arriving at McKay's home to provide a series of treatments. While McKay's condition was largely due to the natural wear and tear of aging, Andrew was able to give him some relief through stretches, ultrasound treatment, and massage. It was a far cry from faith healing, but it was precisely what the prophet needed. The two hit it off immediately. Despite their different religious backgrounds, Kramer and McKay found common ground in their mutual respect for health, the body, and perhaps a shared sense of humor. Andrew, always with a bit of irreverence, greeted McKay one morning with a line that became legendary in both their circles. He said, "Well, Prophet, just how the hell are you this morning?" For his part, McKay referred to Andrew as that wonderful Gentile. Moments like these showcased Andrew's ability to connect with anyone from religious leaders to everyday people. His personality was as much a part of his healing process as his technical skill. He knew laughter and lightheartedness could be as therapeutic as any stretch or massage. Dr. Andrew Kramer's work with David O. McKay was just one of many examples of how his reputation reached far beyond the typical bounds of the medical world. By the end of their time together, the prophet felt better and had gained a deep respect for the man who helped him.
I want to emphasize Andrew Kramer was very much a product of his time. He was known for being blunt and direct. He had no filter, especially when it came to advocating for his clients. He had little patience for professionals he believed were too businesslike or weren't giving their best. His philosophy was simple. You cannot help what you don't care for. His approach stood out in a field where empathy and personal connection were often overlooked. For Andrew, true healing came from caring deeply about each individual who walked into his clinic. This belief sometimes led to clashes with others in the field. One of the figures he had very strong opinions about was Berta Bobath, the creator of neurological developmental training and the so-called equilibrium ball, a method still widely used in physical therapy today. While Bobath made significant contributions in her own way in dealing with muscles to the therapeutic field, Andrew had little respect for her personally. He saw her as an arrogant bully on a power trip, since she had an often harsh manner with clients, starkly contrasting his compassionate, patient-centered approach. These strong opinions weren't just for show, they reflected Andrew's deep commitment to his clients. He was unapologetic in his belief that physical therapy should be about genuine care, not coercion, professional ego, or power struggles.
I have to interrupt here and just say something. The equilibrium balls of Bobath are, I have very strong opinions about those. I mean, my background is neuropsychology. I've done a lot of work with people with these kinds of issues. And I must say that I completely concur with Andrew's notions about how useless they are, and the methods of using them, how Paleolithic they are. And I just wanted to add that in.
I thank you for that, Dr. Weaver. I mean, there is certainly nothing wrong with trying a new method, but the people around Bobath seem to regard this as an almost cure-all, a universal answer to any problem. And one of Andrew Kramer's favorite sayings was, you cure meat, you can't cure people. In other words, muscles can be developed, programs can be organized, but if a person has a problem, it's not going away. And it's foolish to go through an endless cycle trying to make something disappear when you should concentrate on maximizing benefits.
Well, just to be real blunt, I place equilibrium balls about on the same level as the sand that bone doctors and shamans put out there. It's absurd. Anyhow, beyond the clinic, Andrew Kramer found great joy and inspiration in the world of scouting, like Boy Scouts. To him, the scouting movement represented more than badges and camping trips. It symbolized disciplined leadership and personal achievement. He especially held Eagle Scouts and Gold Award winners in high esteem, considering them an elite class of individuals who embodied the values he cherished. On many occasions, Andrew would say with conviction, they are the guardians of the Republic. To him, these young men and women, through their dedication and hard work, were the future stewards of the nation's values. He admired the selflessness, determination, and character building that came with achieving such high honors in scouting.
That attitude came from his association in the 1940s with James West, the man who knew Lord Baden-Powell in the UK and brought scouting as we know it to the United States. And he believed we deserved the highest quality of emotional and physical care. He gave everything he had to make that happen. I want to explain a little bit why this man was so important to me. Uh, at the beginning of my time in the kindergarten program of this school, there were a lot of non-academic things going on. I found myself in a number of what was called evaluations, which is a mixture of intelligence tests, physical assessments, socialization, and observations about personal interactions. It's a very daunting experience, particularly as a young child, sitting in a room while a bunch of medical professionals you don't know size up your strengths and weaknesses, and particularly when you're a child, seem to be almost omnipotent. I didn't quite understand what they wanted from me, and that confusion somehow deepened some of my fears. During one of these evaluations, I was waiting for an orthopedic specialist. I didn't give the name, a brash guru who seemed to believe he held my future in his hands and had some very negative ideas about my limitations. His cool, almost indifferent appraisals of my abilities and his rapid fire approach left me very confused. During a series of tests, he asked me to do something. I didn't quite hear what it was. I didn't understand what he wanted. So I said, "I'm sorry, what am I supposed to do? What do you want?" His response was impatient and cruel. He began to yell, basically telling me that I wasn't cooperating and I was wasting his time, etc., etc. And being so young, scared to death, I didn't take it well. After a few minutes, I began to cry. But at that moment, Andrew Kramer walked into that room, walked across to where I was, literally took me in his arms, shielding me from the emotional harshness of the situation, and turned all of his wrath onto that specialist. I remember to this day exactly what he said. He started off, "That's no way to treat anyone, but especially not one of my boys. You are not a physician, you are a file clerk with a lab coat and a big ego. I swear I'm going to make something of this boy," referring to myself. From that moment on, I knew that Dr. Kramer wasn't just a therapist, he was my friend, my protector, my advocate. He believed in me just as my family did, just as you did, Dr. Beaver, when so many others only saw my limitations. Later, there was a meeting of the board of directors, and a group of people suggested I might work with another therapist. He stood up in front of the entire group and said just two words: "He's mine." That sense of love and fierce loyalty, that dedication, was what made him much more than just an ordinary professional. He was a force of nature, determined to see me and everyone else around him succeed.
For more than 2 decades, off and on, when his loved ones weren't suffering from illness, Dr. Kramer took you to himself. Your physical therapy sessions were unlike anything else, as you have told me. They weren't just about the exercises or the movements. They were filled with historical music, conversations about spirituality, and the older man's stories. Stories about his early days, fighting for the health of people who often didn't even understand his purpose.
He was a man full of wisdom, and he didn't shy away from sharing his thoughts on almost any subject and on the world around it. He railed against change for its own sake. He believed deeply in tradition and purpose, never embracing even progress unless it served to better people's lives. And he took immense pride in my achievements, whether it was standing for the first time or completing an academic task. It mattered to him as much as it mattered to me. For 23 years, he wasn't just a therapist. As I've said, he was my example and my greatest advocate. And it's those moments, a lifetime of those moments and those conversations made all the difference. His passion was unmistakable, and he was determined to uphold the ideals, as I've said, guiding his life and work. His hands, physical therapy was as much about the mind, spirit, and heart as it was about the body. He believed in everyone of his patients, fighting for them with the same conviction he brought to every part of his life. In a changing age, Andrew Kramer stood firm as a symbol of honor, love, and dedication. A reminder that these core values are timeless, no matter how much the world evolves. Founded in an era before the Rehab Act, Lakeview School was created with a singular purpose to prevent students with disabilities, as they were called then, from being institutionalized and left to rot. In those days, there were few options for children with different circumstances. And without the protections and opportunities available today, many faced a bleak future in impersonal institutions. But as I've said, Lakeview was different. From its early days in that garage, became a bulwark against the limitations society placed on the disabled, children and adults alike. Under the guidance of dedicated professionals like Dr. Kramer, who was far from the only one, it nurtured and educated brilliant students like my dear friend Edward Haas, who's a very prominent lawyer, Dr. Sarah Bogdan, Ronald Cusimano, many, many others, each with their own abilities, their own exceptionalities. What might have seemed like a simple operation turned into a life-changing force, transforming lives and shaping the future.
As we reflect on the later years of Dr. Andrew Kramer's career, it's important to note the frustration he experienced with the rising generation of therapists. Though many of them possessed the technical skills necessary for the job, Dr. Kramer saw something missing: the deep personal bond he believed was crucial to truly helping his clients. Dr. Kramer had always seen his work as more than just physical therapy. For him, it was about forming meaningful relationships with his patients and understanding their fears, hopes, and challenges. In his view, healing was a holistic process that required not only medical expertise, but also emotional connection. Kramer grew concerned that this personal touch was being lost as the field became more specialized and technically advanced. He often voiced his frustration with younger therapists who, while skilled, seemed detached from their clients, saying, "You cannot help what you don't care for," lamenting that the newer generation didn't seem to share his passion for truly getting to know the individuals they were treating. He believed clients who had been treated in an impersonal or even harsh manner developed fears of treatment. Trust had to be built before the real work could begin. Physical touch was key, but not in the way one might expect. Desensitization, as he called it, required touch, not as a clinical examination or something tied to sexuality, but stimulating calm, a continuous movement between the opposing forces of panic and bliss. In Dr. Kramer's view, this physical connection helped to bridge the gap between fear and comfort.
He was known for his unwavering belief in clients' potential. He once told a friend of mine, who's now a prominent lawyer, "I've seen you do the impossible. You don't have to earn the right to be cared for." These words carried immense weight, building up confidence, reminding the young people they deserved care and compassion simply by being themselves. His last grand achievement, when in semi-retirement, was to be a grand reunion of clients from all over the country. He spent the last year of his life trying to get this thing ready. He had fought off illness and age so many times, it sometimes seemed to me like he would live forever. But he was not able to do so this time. On March 10th, 2000, at the age of 88, passed away. I and so many others are better people because of the example, the wisdom, and the encouragement of this giant.
Okay, let's turn our spotlight to a remarkable yet often overlooked politician, Arthur J. Sills, New Jersey's Attorney General from 1962 to 1970. Sills' career wasn't just about law and order, but also about breaking barriers for people with disabilities, making him one of the most important disabled politicians in American history, of course, after Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Born in 1917 in Brooklyn, New York, Arthur Sills grew up in a working class Jewish family. Despite contracting polio as a child, which left him with lifelong physical challenges, Sills refused to let his disability define him. He graduated from Rutgers University and Harvard Law School, paving the way for a career few thought possible for someone with his physical limitations. Now, just a little aside here, Dr. Deneen, as you pointed out quite correctly, there is a difference between acquiring a exceptionality or having one from a very young age.
Indeed, both in terms of the reality and into terms, even more so in the past, of societal attitudes. Sills got his exceptionality in early childhood. It really took a great deal of effort for him to be educated. His family literally paid people when he wasn't able to stand to carry him up the stairs of Rutgers and Harvard. This is decades before the Rehab Act or the Disabilities Act.
So, getting back to Sills, polio didn't just test his resolve. It also gave him deep empathy for the marginalized, a quality defining his career. I learned early on, Sills once said in an interview, the barriers are only as strong as the will to break through them. Disability teaches resilience, and resilience breeds vision. He discovered inner strength while undergoing rehab under the brilliant, brash Helena Mohany. As Attorney General, Sills took on organized crime and fought for civil rights in a state undergoing significant demographic and social change. One of his landmark cases involved supporting the Civil Rights Act of 1964, making New Jersey a leader in desegregation efforts in housing and education.
As we've been talking about, friends, just imagine the sheer amount of grit it took, not just to lead legal battles, but to do so as a person navigating a world that wasn't accessible at all for people with disabilities. Ramps, cut downs, elevators, all the adaptive technology we take for granted today didn't exist in most buildings, government or private, in the 1960s. Sills began his legal career in private practice, but he quickly became active in Democratic Party politics. In 1962, Governor Richard J. Hughes appointed him as New Jersey's Attorney General. While his disability was still a point of curiosity for some, Sills never allowed it to overshadow his determination or his competence. He wasn't looking for pity. He didn't wish to be singled out. He simply wished to do his job in peace. While his professional work focused on the law relating to civil rights and the tax code, Sills also quietly advocated for disability rights. He used his position to influence policies that increased opportunities for disabled individuals, particularly in education and employment. He was a personal friend of Justin Dart, one of the pioneers of the Disability Act.
Behind the scenes, Sills worked with organizations that would eventually become part of the broader disability rights movement, helping to lay the groundwork for the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and later the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. Though not credited publicly, his contributions to fostering a culture of inclusivity were undeniable. By excelling in his role and subtly pushing for change, he normalized the idea that people with disabilities could serve at the highest levels of government. Sills wasn't immune to prejudice or ableism. Opponents occasionally questioned his fitness for office, citing his disability as a supposed limitation. However, his record of accomplishments always spoke louder than his detractors, no matter how loud they spoke. His personal experience with polio also shaped his legal philosophy. He often argued that justice should be accessible to all, not just in principle, but in practice. This belief led him to his support for reforms that made New Jersey's court system more user-friendly, particularly for low-income and disabled individuals. Arthur Sills stepped down as Attorney General in 1970 and returned to private practice. He passed away in 1982, but his legacy remains a touchstone for both legal reformers and disability advocates. Today, Sills is remembered not just as an attorney general, but as a trailblazer who redefined what public service could look like.
In many ways, disability rights advocate Mark Ricci once said, Sills was a living precursor to the ADA. He didn't just open doors for himself, he paved the way for generations to come to walk or to roll through them. I only met him once as a very young boy. As I said, he was a friend of Dr. Kramer's. They were both involved in a patriotic organization called the Woodmen of the World. And I remember sitting in Dr. Kramer's rec room talking to us. It couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. And after we talked for a while, he turned to him and said, Andrew, this boy's got a lot to say. I guess some things haven't changed, my friends. But I thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. These two men are very dear to my heart. And I think it's important that we recognize the commonality of the human experience. We all have needs and abilities, and it's very important to try to look at what brings us together when the temptation is to look at what we disagree with or what tears us apart.
Indeed. Thank you for listening, and hopefully you will join us on some other episodes. We have a lot of interesting things coming. And hey, while you're thinking about it, since I'm reminding you right now, go down there. You see that little bell? Click that so you get reminders about new topics that are coming up. And give us a like. Give us your comments. Give us suggestions if you have them. That's fine. We enjoy them. And we will see you again soon, hopefully. Bye for now.
Good night, friends.